Yay Networks.
We're talking about GLP-1s in today's episode, and I'll be doing my best to answer the question that I am often asked. What do I think of this newer generation of weight loss drugs, these injectable weight loss medications? We'll be talking about benefits and potential benefits that are still being explored even beyond managing diabetes and weight loss. We'll, of course, also be talking about the side effects and what to know if you're considering taking these drugs and what to consider what it means over the long term. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Welcome to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, where we dive deep into the latest health topics. We're covering the science, the stories, the behind the scenes to help you continue to make informed decisions about your health. And today we're talking about one of these topics that has been just making tremendous headlines and it just keeps growing and growing. We're talking about GLP-1 weight loss drugs. And this is that category of injectable weight loss medications that includes Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and others. Ozempic, I kind of think of it as like the Coca-Cola of weight loss drugs. It's almost like the generic brand name that we refer to all of them. So someone will say, I think they're on Ozempic. Well, it could be any of those. You know, there's the top three that we'll be talking about is Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. Again, Ozempic is sort of the category header that a lot of people use for them. It's what's become synonymous with weight loss. So we'll be talking about the differences with these and whether you've heard about them through friends, through media, social media. There's so much focus on these medications. It's just exploding. I've actually covered this topic twice before, once with a pharmacist and once with a gynecologist. I'll link to both of those interviews in the show notes of this episode. And in today's episode, I'll be doing my best to answer that question that I'm often asked. What do you think of these weight loss drugs? I get asked a lot, what do I think of them? What do I think of people taking them? So let's start with acknowledging this can be a hot button topic. It can be polarizing, even within families, within friends. There's conversations buzzing around who's taking it. You know, there's speculation about, is someone taking it? Then there's conversation about, can you ask someone? Should you ask or not ask if someone is taking Ozempic? It's an entirely new landscape. There was actually recently Barbara Streisand, of all people, caught a lot of heat for asking Melissa McCarthy on social media if she was taking Ozempic. And, you know, it's one of those things where someone may ask innocently enough. And a lot of times someone may be coming at this with the best of intentions, but people don't always know. And so there can be a lot of defensiveness. There can be a lot of judgment about it. You know, I've seen several different cases. I think I'm in a little bit of a different space because as a dietitian and, you know, a confidant for a lot of people in that space around wellness, you know, people will talk about either their thoughts on it, their considerations. If they are taking it, they're sharing things that maybe they don't share with others. And in several cases I've seen where there's been friends who are friends or family who are critical of people they're very close with who are taking Ozempic or similar. And people, they'll be really critical, either whether it's critical, judgmental, or maybe they're concerned, but they'll express, gosh, I wish they weren't taking this, or I don't think it's a good idea for this friend or family who's close with me to be taking these injectable weight loss medications. Over time, this is the part that I've seen that's interesting. The very people who will express, whether it's criticism or concern or judgment about that close friend or family member who's taking it, more than a few of them have started taking it themselves. So they're having fears about it and they're seeing it in other people who are taking it. And they're seeing, over time though, when they're seeing the benefits that they're seeing with these close friends or family, what it seems like on the outside is that it's starting to kind of push back, edge away some of those own fears that they're taking enough that the concern has turned into interest and they've started taking it themselves. And talking about how polarizing or divisive the conversation is, just recently I was giving a presentation to a group of medical students, and there's maybe 70 in the room. And one person asked, "Hey, what do you think about the GLP-1s, the category of these injectable weight loss medications?" And it was someone in the room who asked it, and the answer that I gave, I'll give a snapshot of my answer, which is what we'll be covering in greater detail throughout this episode. The answer that I gave really elicited a negative response from one student in particular, and he was stunned. He was surprised. He was stunned. He seemed to be like almost just completely dismissive, or I don't want to say disgusted because that's a strong word, but could not believe that I might not be 100% on board with GLP-1s across the board. So it was an interesting thing because the whole rest of the presentation was fairly smooth, well received, the content through there. The question from someone asking about this really elicited a strong response from the student who was very critical of the fact that, again, I have doubts about the how widespread it is that people who are taking the GLP-1s. And he really gave a lot of pushback. He was like, "Am I understanding correctly? Am I understanding that you are questioning these?" And so, and I'll share with y'all in a minute my answer. I'll also say, on a side note, I got pushback from the same guy in that class, in the class I was giving to these medical students, in response as about my recommendation to limit consumption of artificial sweeteners. So to say that we want to keep things as natural as possible, to limit artificial sweeteners, really strong pushback on that too. So there's that. You got to take everything with a grain of salt. But the answer that I gave, and this sort of a snapshot, we'll talk about it more, but the gist of it, when someone says, "What do you think about this?" I do see the benefit for patients with obesity and for people who are overweight who also have other risk factors stemming from excess weight. I do see the benefit of that. And we'll be talking a lot about the common side effects. We'll be talking about the potential for more serious side effects. I think we can all agree that there are a lot of people who have struggled with their weight for years, and they either, again, have obesity or they're overweight with other risk factors. And there's such a high risk of incidence from their excess body weight that taking something like a GLP-1 injectable weight loss medication, the potential benefits there can outweigh the risk. Where I have the concern, and the most concern though, is when people are taking these medications for what I refer to as, quote, vanity pounds. These vanity pounds, those 10 to 20 pounds that they're looking to lose, they're not increasing their health risks. They're not increasing, they're not struggling with diabetes or hypertension because of this extra weight. We're talking, again, vanity pounds. They're asking their doctors to prescribe them these drugs. Also, kind of going back to that polarizing or divisive effect of this, when I was talking about this conversation in this upcoming podcast to a friend, she said, "Molly, I don't know if you would want to use the phrase vanity pounds. There's people who might take offense to that." But that's really what it is. If someone is, an otherwise healthy weight, their clothes may be just a little bit tighter over the years. They may be looking at, whatever it is, 8, 10, 20 pounds, 15 pounds. For most people, that is vanity weight. And so that's when I look at the concern, and I wouldn't recommend, if this was a close friend of mine, if this was a family member and they said, "Hey, I've got 10 pounds, 12, 15 pounds that I want to lose. Do you think that I should take these GLP-1s, these injectable weight loss medications?" My answer would be probably not. Unless there's something else really going on, it's not something that I would recommend. There's a laundry list of side effects of these medications. most people hear about nausea, loss of appetite, of course, which is what it kind of leads into the weight loss. Other types of GI upset, they hear about these as the most common symptoms, and these are the most common symptoms that we'll talk about, but there's also more. So I worry about the side effects and especially that risk benefit ratio when someone is injecting themselves with a relatively new weight loss drug to lose 10 pounds, 20 pounds. I'm especially concerned, and this is what I shared with the medical students in my presentation. These drugs are so new. This class of drugs, the GLP-1s, it's been around for less than 20 years, largely used to treat diabetes, early on. Ozempic has only been on the market for 6 years. Yet, for them to continue to be effective, we're supposed to take them indefinitely for life if we want to continue to reap the benefits. So that's where my concern comes in. There's also a lot of past examples of medications that at one point were thought to be game changers, miracle drugs. And then over time, we learned of damaging side effects, harmful side effects. So that's sort of where my caution comes in. So today, what we'll be covering in this episode, we'll be talking about these medications, just what these GLP-1 drugs are, and what we do know about how they work. We'll also talk about the benefits. There's also, it's not just going to be, it's not just going to be me being uber cautious about this. There's a lot of potential benefits of these, even beyond weight loss, that are still being explored that I think has a lot of exciting benefit there. And of course, we'll talk more about the side effects because, like we said, the potential for those negative effects, it goes way beyond just a little bit of nausea and queasiness. So we'll be talking today what to know if you're considering taking these drugs, what questions to ask, and what it means over the long term. So, starting with the science of GLP-1 drugs, GLP-1 stands for glucagon like peptide 1. Glucagon is a hormone that plays a key role in maintaining or managing our blood sugar levels, our appetite. These medications, these injectable medications, they mimic the action of GLP-1 by binding to the receptors in our body, which it helps to decrease our blood sugar levels. It can help lead to weight loss. These drugs were originally developed for diabetes. And, years ago when I first was hearing clients and friends with type 1 or 2 diabetes who were taking these, they had taken things like, varying levels of metformin or insulin over the years. And so this is people who were kind of versed in that space of medications for diabetes management. And when they started taking some of these other medications, these GLP-1s that we're now talking about a lot for weight loss, but they were originally developed for diabetes, when these clients and friends started taking these, it was a game changer. It was a life changer. So remembering that the root of these was in diabetes. And over time, researchers realized, wow, not only does it really do a good job of helping to drop and stabilize and manage healthy blood sugar levels, it's also really helping to lead to weight loss. So researchers are still kind of understanding just how these work. There's a lot that they'll understand in very specific areas of how these are targeted, but there's a lot that's still unknown. So what we see is that it appears to slow digestion, it's keeping our blood sugar stable, and it's reducing appetite. So the end result is that people tend to feel fuller longer. They tend to eat less. And all of this, of course, over time can translate to weight loss. So when you look at, like we said, the top three, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, there's differences between these. There's a lot of differences too in terms of insurance coverage, commercial insurance coverage, how they're prescribed. And I'm not going to get into those. We did talk about some of that with the pharmacist that we interviewed. And I'll also say that the websites have a good bit of information to help at least to start that conversation and to see what does coverage look like for you. They make it actually stunningly easy to see, is this something that is potentially covered if you have commercial insurance? There's also a lot of information on these websites, that all of them, I'll say too, really are emphasizing that while these help to manage diabetes, all of them, kind of throw in the language of along with diet and exercise. So, these injections are the idea is not to just inject and then try to just, go on about your normal lifestyle. You also want to really make sure that you're incorporating nourishing foods, because especially if you're eating less, and we'll talk in a minute about, sort of some of the risk of not getting all the nutrients you need. But the idea is that with all of them, Ozempic, Wegovy, Manjaro, and others, the websites are very specific that yes, this is a drug that can help to improve blood sugar. It can, in some of these specifically that are talking about weight related problems, helping to lose weight, they all are including the language about when it's with a healthy diet and increase in physical activity. When we talk about the real world implications of committing to taking these injectable weight loss drugs, there's a catch. There's several catches, even before we get into the side effects. It's important to know, and I think that people hear this, but it doesn't really sink in like, well, maybe that wouldn't be the case for me. But these are considered forever drugs. This means that people are supposed to stay on them for the rest of their lives. It's the same as, like taking statin drugs for your cholesterol or taking blood pressure medications. You're generally committing to these forever for the rest of your life. And when we stop taking those types of drugs, the statins for our cholesterol or blood pressure medications, if or when we stop taking them, we're typically going to lose the benefit of those drugs. So it's the same thing with these GLP-1s. So they are considered forever drugs, meaning that people are supposed to stay on them for the rest of their lives, and staying on them indefinitely if you want to maintain the benefits. I was talking with another friend of mine who is in we'll just say like the beauty business. And so she has a lot of clients that are coming in that she's working with them from an aesthetic approach. And, it's largely women, but also some men. And there's a lot of conversation about appearances. And, she gets a lot of information about, so people share with her that they're taking these. And she commented that a lot of her clients, they've been around now long enough that she's seeing kind of that full cycle with her clients. She's seeing clients who went on these GLP-1 injectable weight loss medications. They came off of them for whatever reason. They had side effects, or it was the cost, which we'll talk about in a minute. The cost, side effects, for whatever reason, they came off of them, or they thought, okay, I've lost the weight that I wanted to lose. Now I'll stop taking these. And every single one of them started to regain weight and is now back on them. So it's one of those things that if, just know that going into it, that if you decide to take these, if you want to continue to maintain the benefits, you'll probably need to stay on these drugs indefinitely. So then that brings up just really big questions about long-term use and, long-term side effects. And then again, what happens if or when you stop taking them. So that's like, I think, one catch to be aware of. The other is, this is one of those things that I think probably most people are aware of, but these drugs are wildly expensive and they're often not covered by insurance. So if you are paying out of pocket, prepare for ballpark range of $600 to $1,200 every month. So it's not cheap. Someone, mentioned that it's like a car note or multiple car notes. So some of the drug manufacturers, you'll see, I mentioned the companies have these really, no surprise, but the drug companies have these very interactive and user-friendly websites that help you see, does it look like my insurance coverage my insurance will cover this? And if so, you put in, a good bit of personal information, and it gives you the content that you would need to talk to your doctor about it. Of course, they're going to make it as hopefully easy as possible on their end to get the individual who's visiting the website to have this conversation with their physician or ask or see about taking these medications. Also on their websites, there's often, level of financial support. It might be coupons or promo codes or things like that you can use. One local health organization here in New Orleans is actually subsidizing these weight loss drugs for employees. And so my understanding is that it'll bring the price from about $1,200 a month to $400 a month for the employees. The healthcare group is subsidizing the difference. So $1,200 a month subsidized down to $400 a month by the company. And then the drug manufacturer has a coupon for about another $200. So that leaves the individual paying about $200 a month instead of maybe $1,200 a month. So that's what, again, one local healthcare organization is doing for employees to try to make it affordable for employees to have these. The question is, well, how long will that pharmaceutical company be offering that incentive? Otherwise, instead of 200 a month, is it going to pop back up to 400 a month? And again, 400 a month, I mean, that's a car note. It's, if someone's talking $1,200 a month, I mean, that's a lot. So, it's very, um, know that these are forever drugs. They are wildly expensive. And unless someone has diabetes, they're often not covered by insurance. Side effects, let's talk about that. So, like all medications, I mean, nothing is without a level of side effect. So, the most common side effects of most of them are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and constipation. Those are sort of the ones that you hear of the top three: Ozempic, Wegovy, Manjaro. Wegovy adds in, some others, someone, people may feel, but I would say these could probably apply to all three. But specifically, Wegovy's website also includes things like headache, fatigue, feeling dizzy, feeling bloated, heartburn, the sore throat. Those are some of the things that they've seen as you would say like mild side effects. All of them could have the potential for low blood sugar, especially in someone with diabetes. So those are I would say, common side effects, especially that nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, constipation. Those are sort of the usuals that people are experiencing with these. But all three of these can have more serious side effects. And this isn't just hypothesizing. This is all from the drug manufacturers' websites. So the more serious side effects of all three of the kind of the big three, the Ozempic, Wegovy, and Manjaro. More serious side effects include gallstones, thyroid tumors including cancerous tumors, pancreatitis, so inflammation of the pancreas, kidney problems, including potential for kidney failure. And then Wegovy includes on there specifically depression or thoughts of suicide. So those are some of the ones that I would say are not to be taken lightly. And that's what we're looking at as side effects that we know of now. What if someone's taking this for 10 years, 20 years or more? What are we going to see at that point? It's possible we may see just more of the same. I mean, that's absolutely possible that it may be exactly as it is. There's not anything else that's unearthed. And, I'm sort of being a skeptic on this, but it's also possible that there may be things that are unearthed over the years that we just don't know about yet because people haven't been taking these in such a widespread way for an extended period of time. Again, like we said, Ozempic has only been on the market at this point for 6 years. So those are some of the side effects. The other thing is nutritional deficiencies because of a reduced food intake, lack of appetite, kind of feeling queasiness. And so reaching for things that maybe feel like, if you think about whenever you're not feeling good, you're feeling kind of queasy, you're feeling a little bit sick, what are the things that a lot of times you might reach for? And so if those are what someone's reaching for and they're not taking in a lot of calories, nutrient deficiency is another potential side effect. It could be vitamins, mineral deficiencies, but it could also be a protein deficiency, essential fatty acids, on and on. So the other thing that I see, and I think that this is one where being mindful is part of that deficiency, is a lack of calories, fewer calories. But as we're losing weight, we want to try to minimize muscle losses. And I've seen, it's one of those where unless someone is really making sure that they are including that strength training, it can be really easy for the pounds lost on the scale to also include that valuable muscle mass. So a recommendation, if this is something that you decide is right for you to take these medications, plan to work in a level of strength training on a regular basis, ideally at least 3 days a week. Doesn't have to be, something super intense, but making sure that you are incorporating that strength training, that resistance training. And I'll include a link to some content that we've talked about on that before too, that'll just give maybe some ideas. And it could be with a trainer. You could schedule a few sessions to educate on how to use whatever equipment might be available to you, whether it's at home or, some people have, if they're living in an apartment building and there's a gym either in that building or nearby, how do you use that equipment and how to use it effectively? So even if it's not committing to a trainer on an ongoing basis, that trainer can really help to educate on how to, what that routine can look like for you. So I think making sure that if you are making the decision to do these, being aware that losing muscle mass can be a negative consequence. So making sure that you're introducing or continuing that strength training if so. So shifting gears to the benefits. So this is one where if even some of these benefits pan out over the long run, I think this is going to be just really exciting. So we mentioned that these drugs were originally developed as diabetes drugs, and so diabetes drugs is sort of where they were born. Weight loss has lately been, the real headline, the real attention getter. But these GLP-1 drugs have potential benefit that is looking like it could reach far beyond just dropping pounds and helping to manage glucose levels. So earlier this year, the FDA said that doctors could use Wegovy to reduce the risk of heart problems specifically, and that Wegovy, on the flip side, can also make claims about their product reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So looking at something like Wegovy, one of these brands, as a looking at there's so much benefit on it, that was, yes, weight loss, but also so much heart health, cardiovascular health benefit that they could actually make the claim that it could be effective in reducing risk of cardiovascular disease. There's also 2 recent trials that found that the active compound in Manjaro appears to improve sleep apnea. So, and some of it, over time could, for the individual, could be a chicken and an egg thing. So if someone's taking Manjaro, there's the active ingredient, so to speak, in Manjaro, appears to improve sleep apnea. But also, as someone is losing those extra pounds, their sleep apnea will likely also improve. So, the benefits again beyond simply weight. So, cardiovascular disease, sleep apnea. Currently, researchers are running dozens of trials to explore other things. So they're looking at the potential that they're seeing where these weight loss drugs might also help with things like Alzheimer's or liver disease or PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, even certain types of skin conditions. And one of the common themes that they're looking into is, does Ozempic and these other GLP-1 drugs, do they have the effect of reducing inflammation in our body? And that could be one of the common themes that would help explain how this class of drugs, GLP-1s, could reduce our risk of things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, more, this whole host of things that we're seeing potential benefit for. If it does turn out that this newer generation of these drugs really does help to reduce or combat inflammation, that could help explain how they could have such promise across such an array of conditions. So potential that, is currently under, more research, more science is needed, but Alzheimer's, liver disease, PCOS, skin conditions, sleep apnea, and again, already approval to make that claim of reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So I would say positives there for sure that are either shown or potential that are currently being studied. But then regardless, obesity itself is associated with a long list of medical problems. Diabetes, liver disease, heart disease, certain types of cancer, sleep apnea, joint pain. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And so losing weight, even if it's with these GLP-1 medications, it's possible, or I mean, even more, it simply just makes sense that in many cases, these other conditions are going to be improved. So another interesting positive side effect there seems to be a very real and a significant impact on cravings in general. So, not only do people find that they have less interest in food, one way that I've heard a lot of people describe it, they say the food noise is reduced. The obsession with food, the thoughts consuming them around the clock about food, that is reduced with these GLP-1s. It's, that alone can be life-changing for people when from the time they wake up till the time they go to sleep, this is a constant struggle. It's a constant battle of the being bombarded with thoughts of food, having these internal struggles, that push-pull of having that craving or having that desire, but then trying to elicit that willpower. But then they're having to try to have that willpower kicked into high gear during every waking moment. So taking these GLP-1s really helps to turn down that food noise, which is one of the biggest life changers, game changers for people. What is that other interesting side effect that I mentioned is that it doesn't seem to be just cravings for food. So when someone has that sort of obsessiveness or craving or desire for fill in the blank, these GLP-1s seem to also help reduce that. And especially what's been reported is reducing their cravings or their desire to drink alcohol for alcohol. And so it's some that, yeah, maybe they're just consuming less of everything overall, but over and over and over, people are like, wow, I used to come home from work and I couldn't wait to pour that cocktail or pour that glass of wine. And now, like, it's that drive isn't even there for those things. So that's something that to me is very interesting. Those of y'all who've listened to this podcast, on the regular know about our annual alcohol free for 40 challenge. It's every year between Mardi Gras and Easter. And, being able, when you think about what that food noise is like for people and people who are just consumed with that and every day is a struggle. I mean, we know that exists for people also with things like alcohol. So if something like the GLP-1s also have that positive effect of turning down the noise for that on food noise, reducing cravings or desire to drink alcohol. That's a tremendous positive. Researchers are also looking into whether these drugs might also help to buffer our other compulsive behaviors. So there's some animal studies that show that GLP-1s could help potentially reduce cravings for even drugs like cocaine. And researchers are looking at, more of that on the impact of these GLP-1s on addictive behaviors like gambling and smoking. So all in all, there's a good bit of data, encouraging data, that is showing that potential benefit in so many other ways beyond even managing diabetes and weight loss, those typical headlines. There's a lot of other potential benefit here, and including things that might be surprising or a little bit unexpected, like curbing the hold of some of these addictive behaviors. And there's a separate side note. This was just, it kind of just shows how far reaching all of this is. I had a large food distribution company reach out to me just a few weeks ago, and they said, hey, have you seen any impact of how Ozempic, of course, kind of using Ozempic as that umbrella term, is affecting people's food buying habits? So now this is a food distribution company that is distributing into restaurants, into grocery stores. They're sort of the back end distributor of foods. And I would say, knowing, I'm not going to say the name of the food distribution company, but knowing I'm very familiar with a lot of the types of products they carry, and they're not all that great nutritionally. It's sort of a lowest common denominator on a lot of the things that they have that are basics for people, that are restaurants, the salad dressings, the wraps, the breads, like they're just okay, but they don't really have a lot of truly wholesome, healthy, nutritious products. So this company is worried, hey, how's this going to affect us? If people are purchasing less food in the grocery store or they're buying smaller portions in restaurants, how does this affect us as the food distribution company? And so I thought that was interesting that these are conversations they're having on the back end. They were talking about some of the fast food chains are offering either currently or have in the works to offer smaller portions for a lower dollar amount. And so really starting, trying to cater to that space of smaller appetites because of these GLP-1 weight loss medications. So another little interesting side note, food makers are worried about this. Um, South Park, if you are a South Park fan or, just like that kind of thing, they have it was a good special called The End of Obesity about Ozempic. Um, like the South Park episodes, typically, there was some threads of reality and truth in there, and then a lot of embellishment and just kind of like, dramatizing it. But as far as the threads of truth in there, the premise was Cartman, he's struggling with obesity. He was really open about his feeling hopeless, um, very vulnerable about, self-loathing and really low self-esteem as it relates to his weight. And then he learns that these weight loss medications are out there and he sees this, this solution is actually out here that could help to give him like kind of a help him in a way that he never was able to himself before. And yet he didn't have diabetes. His parents can't afford it. They don't have insurance coverage for these. So then that's sort of the whole premise is how is he going to get his weight loss medications? Side note, they have all these moms, all the kids' moms in South Park have been taking Ozempic. They have them all in midriffs, even though it was like set in the winter. They were like, we don't, it was just entertaining in all that space. They also then had the sugar industry. The sugar industry was really had a heightened interest in conquering the GLP-1 manufacturers. And that was sort of the embellishment part. But the idea, and this is sort of the tongue in cheek on this, the sugar industry was concerned of, hey, if all these people get on these GLP-1s, what's the first thing that's going to go? Sugar and things like sugary cereals or whatever it is. So they were bringing in all their mascots, Tony the Tiger and Debbie of Little Debbie's and all of this stuff to try to, sort of an us against them in the whole episode. But it was really interesting that kind of the threads of reality were Cartman's insecurities related to his weight, Cartman's struggles with the healthcare system and insurance system and coverage and, sort of seeing who has access and who can pay for these and then who doesn't. And then the sugar industry, just like these food makers, like that food distributor who reached out to me, all saying, hey, what about us? How's this going to affect us? So then, the part two about it that it's talked about some, but I don't think it's talked about as much as the others. There's the social considerations, the rise of the GLP-1 drugs. I know South Park is just like a silly show, but that it really kind of honed in on, who has access to these. Not everyone does. Not everyone, even, I mentioned the healthcare organization locally who's basically subsidizing them from $1,200 to $400. And then the company, the drug manufacturer has a coupon for another 200. So that leaves you paying $200. Well, not everybody can afford even $200 every month, to help manage their weight. So, and then there's, this brings us to the social considerations. So the tremendous increase in use and availability of GLP-1 drugs, it sparked this complex conversation about body image, about obesity. So there's a lot of people who may have felt a level of acceptance, of feeling at peace or content with their size, with their level of health, and seeing the conversation around these GLP-1s or seeing people who are close to them or seeing people in the media who are taking these, it can bring back in or heighten that level of self-doubt as it comes to body image and acceptance. And how does this change or how does it affect the way that we think about health, our own health, weight, our own weight? And are we too quick to look for that pharmaceutical solution to weight loss? And it kind of goes back to also the vanity pounds, 10 pounds, vanity pounds to true medical need for weight loss. There's also, the access to these drugs. So knowing that they are incredibly expensive, who has access to these, who can afford these? And even when we mentioned that local healthcare organizations bringing it from $1,200 to $400, and then the pharmaceutical companies given another $200, so that brings you to $200 a month. A lot of people still can't afford $200 out of pocket every month, much less $400 or $600 or $1,200. So there's definitely disparity there of who has access to these, who can afford these, and then also who is in the healthcare system in a space where they're having these conversations or able to have these conversations with their provider. So there's a lot there that is still catching up to these drugs hitting the market, having the availability of the market and the availability to us in the market. So there's still a lot catching up in terms of these social considerations. One of the things that has been, I think, another really good benefit of this is that it's really brought the conversation to the surface of recognizing obesity as a disease, not simply as a lack of willpower. So deciding whether we want to use these GLP-1 drugs, it is a deeply personal choice. And I hope that, this episode has been, we've hit several different areas. Hopefully it's given you some insight. It may have reinforced some things that you've heard. It may have alerted you to things that you weren't aware of, whether it's positives or negatives there. But deciding whether or not to incorporate GLP-1 injectable weight loss meds, this is, again, something that's so personal. It's a choice to be made not quickly. It's something to really give thought on, remembering that these are forever drugs, thinking through that risk benefit analysis. It's something that you want to do your best to have the full, most comprehensive information possible, and do this in collaboration with your healthcare providers. So it's not just about, it's thinking through the potential benefits, but it's also looking at that risk benefit analysis, and then fully understanding what that commitment is that's required if you decide to start treatment. So I appreciate you joining me today as we're talking through and exploring this ever intriguing world of GLP-1 drugs. It's going to take years. It's going to take so much more research, so much more data to really understand the full potential of these drugs. And, we say years, but it could be decades or more before we know their true impact, both positive and negative. As mentioned, I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. Let me know what you think. Let me know questions you have and experiences you've had. I always want to hear about it. I learn so much from the feedback I get from you guys. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.